The cameras were rolling when a stagehand near the back entrance of the studio suddenly waved off a security guard trying to stop a man in a donated winter coat from walking straight onto the studio floor mid-taping. Marcus Steele stopped mid-sentence, card in hand, and stared as the man, later identified as 44-year-old Terrence Hall, walked directly toward the blue podium where two 16-year-old girls stood frozen, their mother's hand gripping the podium edge so hard her knuckles had gone pale. 200 audience members went dead silent. A producer's voice crackled frantically through an earpiece somewhere off camera. Marcus Steele held up one hand without even looking toward the noise and said only, "Let him come," before anyone could stop what was already happening. Terrence Hall had not seen his twin daughters, Maya and Mariah, in 16 years. He had not planned to be anywhere near that studio that day. Terrence had been living, for the better part of the last 4 years, out of a converted van parked behind a church that allowed him to use its outdoor water spigot in exchange for helping with the food pantry twice a week. Before the van, there had been 2 years of an actual homeless shelter. And before that, a stretch of 18 months he still could not fully account for, lost somewhere in the space between losing a construction job to a company-wide layoff, losing an apartment 3 months later, and losing, somewhere in the chaos of trying to survive both of those things at once, contact with a family he had once had every intention of never letting go. 16 years earlier, Terrence and the girl's mother, Denise, had separated on relatively ordinary terms. Not violent, not cruel. Simply two 26-year-olds who had married too young and grown into two different people. The custody arrangement had been informal, generous even, full visitation whenever he wanted it, right up until the layoff, right up until the van, right up until Terrence, ashamed in a way that had calcified into something almost physical over 16 years, stopped calling because he could not bear for his daughters to see what he had become. He told himself every single year on their shared birthday that next year he would have something to offer them again, a stable address, a job, anything besides an apology delivered from the passenger seat of a van with a broken heater. Next year never arrived in the shape he needed it to. He mailed nothing. He called nothing. He simply disappeared into the particular invisibility of homelessness in America. A man who still had a social security number and a birth certificate, and 2 living daughters who, legally, could have found him at any time, had any of them known where to start looking, which none of them did, because Terrence had made sure of it, believing, in the twisted logic of shame, that vanishing was a kindness. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen next. Maya and Mariah Hall had applied to be on Family Bond with their mother as a fun mother-daughters trio segment, the kind of light-hearted family booking the show did regularly, with no connection whatsoever to their father, whom they rarely discussed even with each other. Denise had built a stable, quiet life in the 16 years since Terrence disappeared, remarried, then widowed 5 years later, raising the twins largely on her own through both marriages, never bad-mouthing their father to them, but never able to answer the one question both girls asked with increasing frequency as they got older. Do you think he's even still alive? What none of them knew was that a production researcher, running standard background checks ahead of the taping, routine due diligence the show performed on every family, checking for any newsworthy personal history that might make for compelling television, had come across an old missing person style inquiry Denise had quietly filed years earlier. Not because Terrence was missing exactly, but because a lawyer had once told her it might help if the girls ever needed proof of paternal abandonment for benefits paperwork. The researcher, moved by the file, made an unauthorized decision that nearly cost her job. She spent 4 days tracking outreach networks across 3 states, eventually connecting with the pastor of the church where Terrence's van was parked, who agreed to mention, gently, that a television show was trying to reach him about his daughters, without saying more, unsure himself if it was a scam or something real. Terrence had shown up at the studio that morning, not because he'd been invited on the show, but because the pastor had driven him there himself, uncertain what exactly was happening. Only that a man he'd come to respect over 2 years of food pantry shifts had cried in the church parking lot that morning saying, "If there's even a chance this is real, I have to try." Production staff, scrambling once they realized what was unfolding, initially tried to stop him at the door, uncertain of studio protocol for an unscheduled guest walking directly into a live taping. Terrence pushed past a security guard's outstretched arm, not violently, but with the desperate momentum of a man who had waited 16 years and was not going to be stopped by a rope line. The studio held its breath in a way it hadn't all episode. Marcus Steele, watching a strange, thin man in a donated coat, walk straight across his stage toward 2 teenage girls he had never met, made a split-second decision that would define the rest of the taping. Instead of signaling security to intervene, he stepped between the man and the podium, not to block him, but to slow the moment down enough to understand it. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man who had learned, over 11 years, when a crisis needed volume and when it needed quiet. "Tell me who you are." "Terrence Hall," the man said, breathing hard, his eyes already wet. "Those are my daughters, Maya and Mariah. I haven't seen them in 16 years. I know I have no right to be here. I know that. But somebody told me they were here today, and I couldn't let that chance pass me by again." Denise, standing at the podium, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Maya grabbed her sister's hand. Neither girl moved. But that wasn't even the part that would break the room completely. "Do either of you know who I am?" Terrence asked, and his voice cracked on the second half of the sentence. And it was Mariah, 16 years old, born 4 minutes after her sister, the quieter of the two, who answered, in a voice so small the boom mic barely registered it at first, "Are you our dad?" Terrence's legs finally gave out. He didn't collapse dramatically. He simply lowered himself to the studio floor, kneeling, not caring about the cameras, not caring about the 200 people watching, and said, "Yes. Yes, I am. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry it took this long." The studio fell completely silent. Marcus Steele didn't say anything for several seconds. He stood watching a homeless man kneeling on his stage floor in front of 2 daughters who had just learned, in real time, on national television, that their father was alive. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough. "Cut the cameras on the game," he said. "Bring up the house lights. Somebody get this man some water. And somebody get me answers, because I need to understand what I'm looking at." A stage manager's voice crackled with confusion in his earpiece. Marcus held up a hand without turning. "This has never happened in the 11-year history of this show," he said. "A man does not walk onto my stage mid-taping unless something in him has run out of any other option. I want to know his story before a single security guard touches him again." Denise, shaking, confirmed what Terrence had said was true. The marriage, the separation, the 16 years of silence, the shame she had always suspected was somewhere underneath his disappearance, but had never been able to prove or disprove for her daughter's sake. "I never told them he was gone forever," she said quietly. "I just never had an answer for where he went." The audience thought that confession was the emotional peak. They were wrong. Marcus knelt down next to Terrence, still on the studio floor, and put a hand on his shoulder. "Let me tell you something," Marcus said, quiet enough that the whole studio nonetheless heard every word through the boom mic. "Almost 40 years ago, I was sleeping in a 1976 Ford Tempo that didn't have working heat either. I know exactly what it does to a man to disappear from people who love him. because he's too ashamed to show up with nothing. I know the specific math you do in your head every single year. Next year, I'll have something to offer them. I did that math for years. So when I look at you on this floor, Terrence, I'm not looking at a stranger. Almost 40 years ago, I was you." He wasn't finished. Marcus stood, pulled out his phone in front of every camera still rolling, and dialed a number. "I want everyone watching at home to see exactly how fast this can move when somebody decides to move it," he said. He called his own foundation's housing coordinator directly. "I need emergency transitional housing arranged today, not next week. Today, for a man named Terrence Hall, and I need a case manager assigned by end of day to help him reestablish everything: ID, employment support, whatever it takes to get him standing on his own again, because a man does not spend 16 years too ashamed to show up and then finally show up, only to go back to a van tonight." But Marcus wasn't done. He turned to Maya and Mariah, still standing frozen at the podium. "Girls," he said gently, "your dad didn't disappear because he stopped loving you. He disappeared because he got knocked down by life and didn't know how to stand back up in front of you without something to offer. That's not the same thing as not caring. I need you to hear both of those things at once, because they're both true." Maya was the first to move. She stepped down from the podium, crossed the stage, and knelt down in front of her father on the studio floor, the way you'd kneel next to someone you were afraid might disappear again if you looked away. "I don't care what you have to offer," she said. "I just wanted to know if you were okay." Mariah followed her sister down, and the studio watched two teenage girls hold on to a father they hadn't seen in 16 years, kneeling together on a stage floor that had never seen anything like it in 11 years of taping. The competing family on stage that day, the Boykins family, didn't wait to be asked. The father crossed to the abandoned podium microphone and said simply, "Give them the win. Give them whatever they need. We don't need it today." Before the whole family came down to join the moment, strangers an hour earlier, now standing in a loose circle around a reunited family they had never met before that afternoon. 3 months after that taping, Terrence Hall moved into transitional housing arranged through Marcus Steele's foundation and began a job placement program with a construction company that had partnered with the foundation specifically to hire formerly homeless veterans of the workforce. A year after the taping, Terrence attended Maya and Mariah's joint high school graduation, seated in the front row next to Denise, who had personally saved him a seat. The episode aired 6 weeks later and crossed 280 million views within the first month, trending under the hashtag #LetHimCome, drawn directly from Marcus Steele's words the moment Terrence walked onto the stage. Today, Terrence Hall works full-time, rents a small one-bedroom apartment 40 minutes from his daughters, and sees them most weekends. He volunteers at the same church pantry where he once received food himself, now on the other side of the counter. The foundation Marcus launched in the weeks following the taping, named the Let Him Come Foundation, has since helped house over 400 formerly homeless parents working to reunite with estranged children, providing emergency housing, legal support for reestablishing custody and visitation rights, and job placement services. Marcus Steele, asked later what he remembered most, said, "It wasn't the moment he walked in. It was the moment his daughter knelt down next to him on that floor and said she didn't care what he had to offer. 16 years, and all she ever wanted was to know if her father was okay. That's the whole thing. Right there. That's what all of it was always about." If this incredible story of a father's 16-year absence touched your heart, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to find your family or your way home. Have you ever been reunited with someone you thought was gone for good? Let us know in the comments below. Because as Terrence Hall proved, showing up late is still showing up, and love does not require perfect timing.